Levchin, who is the founder and chief executive of a firm. But that's not all. In case you don't know Max, he really is one of the leading lights of Silicon Valley and arguably of American business writ large. He has done, you can take that. I'm going to keep the elevation going on.
I'll take it, but the ego is starting to fill up.
But you know, Max, he really has done a lot of amazingly cool things. And maybe you know him best as a member of the PayPal Mafia, which was one of the founders of PayPal. But even in that group, you were one of the original gangsters, I think it's safe to say, you and Peter too.
Employee ID was 0.
Right, exactly. And one of my favorite pictures at Fortune magazine, where I was for a number of years, is a picture that we commissioned of that group as really essentially the cast of The Sopranos. So if you Google PayPal Mafia and hit images, you'll see what is one of my favorite photographs in the history of Silicon Valley. There's Peter, there's Reid Hoffman, there's Keith Rabois, and the whole group of them dressed up, and it's like right out of an HBO set. So it's super
Shot
cool.
on location in the Tosca Cafe in North Beach, the traditional Italian neighborhood of San Francisco.
So it's totally legit.
Legit.
So also, Max founded Slide, which was sold to Google. He was an important investor in Evernote and Yelp. He founded a company called Glow, which is an app for infertility. He has been politically active, particularly around the issue of immigration. Max is an immigrant himself from Ukraine. He has the Levchin Prize, which maybe we can talk about. He's dabbled in movies, and Max has even served on the board of Yahoo, and God bless you for that, Max, really and truly, from the bottom of my heart. But we want to talk about fintech, of course, today a little bit, and Affirm, of course, is squarely in the middle of that. And I guess, you know, for the most part, we'd sort of like to just get a grounding and understanding of what Affirm is and what Affirm does. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about the company?
Sure. Give you a 30, 50 second sort of a build up to what it is and how it came to be. So at PayPal, we innovated on the consumer-facing side of payments with a little bit of middleware thrown in. The thing that's always eluded us and sort of stuck in my head was how broken the underlying credit granting infrastructure was. If you look at sort of what PayPal really does, it says, well, credit cards are fine, ACH works, let's make it really accessible and let's make some money out of it, basically. And underneath it is this whole morass known as the FICO-based underwriting, which treats people...
FICO-based underwriting.
FICO-based underwriting and the sort of a conundrum between the issuing and acquiring banks and all the things that we know and don't necessarily love about credit card networks. The two biggest problems with it that really came to a head a few years ago is that people don't really get well represented by the traditional underwriting models, especially if they're young or if they're immigrants or if they had a bump in their life, financially speaking, and that bump occurred for just about every family in America in '08. So after '08, you had this influx of young people, especially, that came up during the post-crisis years, essentially saying, don't trust credit cards. They didn't bail out my parents, little known fact. Credit card industry made a lot of money during the '08, '09, 2010, while the rest of the financial industry was really crumbling. And I have a reason not to trust them. My parents are still in debt, and they can't calculate what the true cost of their high APR credit card really is. I don't want one. And so as I sort of kept on stewing on this notion of, at PayPal, we never really poked at the credit underwriting world. Now is the time to do it because there's so many people that are disenchanted. So pulling on that thread, we started trying to build our own credit score that would be better representative of younger consumers, immigrants like myself, people that have had their run-ins with occasionally late payments and things like that, and define the whole idea as, what if we built a financial institution that is always aligned with its customers' best interest? In other words, it does not make money when its customers are screwing up. It sounds like a very simple concept, but if you look slightly more carefully at the revenue models of traditional credit card providers or traditional lenders, 40% of their profits typically come from late fees, especially if you're going at a lower income demo, lower credit-worthy demo for sure. It's hard to claim that you're selling good deeds by the pound if you are charging people late fees and making almost half your profit on it, all the while telling them, please be on time. You're essentially saying, please be on time, but not so on time that I don't make half my profits. And so we sort of unpacked the whole model over the years and said, well, what if we built one where we didn't make money on late fees, where we didn't do egregious things like deferred interest and all sorts of other tricks the industry have come up with, and let's tailor it exactly to what people need. And what people really need is not credit or credit cards or lines of credit. Most people go through life thinking about that only after it becomes a problem. They want to buy things. They kind of want to get stuff at the store, be it a bicycle or a couch. And we partnered with a whole bunch of retailers. We're up to about 1,500 retailers now and growing very, very quickly, where we would offer a simple, clean, fee-free, transparently priced loan specific to the bicycle or a couch or whatever they're buying, and would basically offer that as an alternative to a credit card transaction. And for people like my mom, who's had a credit card for a long time, never been late, and has a fantastic credit record because she's had exactly the same job for 30 years, she looks at it and says, why would I want a low interest loan or whatever? I have a credit card, I pay it off at the end of the month. If you dial that out to somebody my younger brother's age, he would say, oh, I don't have a credit card, I don't want a credit card, I don't want to be in debt. This is an installment product that allows me to pay it off over months. So that's where we began, and pulling on that thread of let's build an honest financial institution, turns out just about every financial product out there needs the makeover, or in my opinion, the gutting and rebuilding in this very simple image of let's do things that are good for consumers and let's not make money when it's bad for them. And that's the genesis of a firm. We're up to millions and millions of people and billions of loans. So it's taken off quite wildly, but it still sticks to a pretty simple rubric of let's do the right thing.
It's interesting, and I was thinking about what you were saying, how banks make money off of late fees, and they also penalize your institutions, penalize you with prepayment fees. So if you prepay, you're actually penalized for good behavior, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, really amazing. So you guys just make money, you don't have any fees, you just make money off of the spread. So it's your cost of capital, and then the difference between what you make off of your customers and your cost of capital is your business model.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just about to say the prepayment fees is another thing we do not do.
Right, you do not have prepayment fees, good.
Moreover, we take the interest out if you prepay your loan. So if you've been told your interest is going to be $20 on this loan of $200, and then you paid it off a lot sooner than the timeline, we will reduce the interest proportionately.
Okay, and it's an app, of course, right? And
it's in an app, it's embedded in all kinds of, you'll find it on websites, you'll find it inside apps, you'll find it at mobile websites. Half of our traffic, 60% of our traffic is on the phone, which is kind of representative of how younger consumers shop. You can find us on Expedia, and you can find us on the small brand of, my favorite one is probably many of the different coffee equipment providers that we help finance, various fancy espresso machines, things like that.
But travel is a big market for you. In other words,
Yes.
because that's a place where you typically, the only route to finance something would be a credit card. And if you were taking a trip to Mexico or seeing your relatives in Puerto Rico, that you could buy the trip and use installments through a firm.
Yeah, and it really helps people in multidimensional ways. For example, it allows them to book travel earlier without having to save up. And then a lot of people go through this sort of, I'm going to go on vacation in July, this is January, I got to start putting it aside, that's my fund. Meanwhile, the price of tickets is going up because airlines and vacation providers of various kinds ratchet the tickets up as the demand gets hotter. And so if you're buying your tickets in January, you really would prefer to not just drop it down into your credit card and then start revolving and paying extra interest. But you also don't want to wait, even if you're good at saving, because by the time you're in July ready to buy your tickets, they may have added 50 to 100% in price. So that's one. The other one, people really appreciate the transparency. The thing that I didn't anticipate, like we always thought that, look, we'll be honest, we'll be clear, and people will take that as a nice feature. They wouldn't think of that as the number one primary component of the value, but it turns out people see this, or customers see it as a guardrail to be a good financial behavior generator, which is sort of makes sense now. I did not anticipate that.
Series E funding at this point, you've got a lot of venture money.
We've been very lucky with our venture backers, but probably spent 20 years in Silicon Valley. People tend to trust you a little bit more. Yeah, we've raised quite a lot of equity funding to grow. You have to have a lot of very smart people doing a lot of reasonably smart things.
And you said you have millions of customers. What are your other metrics in terms of, the amount of loans outstanding, or how else are you judging the business growth-wise?
The most important metric for me is the Net Promoter Score of our borrowers.
The Net Promoter Score?
Yeah, basically the customer satisfaction score. So if you look at the customer satisfaction score of a credit card issuing bank, if it's greater than 0, they're doing something right. Normally, and it's sort of not particularly hard to imagine, right? If you're borrowing money and then you're slapped with insufficient funds for trying to pay your bill, and you're reminded late, and then you get hit with a late fee, and you got a deferred interest credit card, which was 0% today, but then you missed a payment, and it's $29.99 going back in time from when you got the credit card, it's easy to not recommend this product to your friends. Net Promoter Score is people that will recommend your product minus people that won't. That group is typically larger.
Right.
Once you go up the ladder of good financial providers, you might break into teens and 20s. Ours is 83. The only one I know that's higher is Tesla, and that's a religious cult. And so I think...
Well, it sounds like you may be getting there too then. I mean, if that's, at some point they become religious cults if people are that happy.
We're very, very rational, and so I don't think we're gonna quite get there, but I think Elon's doing amazing things, and I love Tesla, so I'm not knocking it whatsoever. I do think that getting in the 80s as a financial services provider is unique. I don't know anyone else anywhere near us. As far as our scale goes, we try not to sort of brag too much. We're still very early, still very young. We have single-digit millions of customers. That's sort of how we try to. It's a nice number of single-digit millions of customers. Soon maybe to change, but that's where we are today. But I would rather have more satisfied customers and customers that will aggressively recommend our product to others instead of other financial products than have a gigantic pool that just does not like us very much.
All right, Max, let me push back against the very existence of your company, though.
I'm ready.
Okay, you ready for this?
Yeah.
And, I guess you could argue that the last thing that this country needs is another source of credit for consumers. And that, there's myriad credit card companies. We're always hearing about too much debt in the system. Sure, you're not going to penalize people, but this is just another way to borrow more money and buy, expensive furniture or take frivolous trips. And you can get in trouble this way anyway. And by the way, I've been rejected by 25 credit card companies. Oh, goody, I'll go to a firm. They'll never figure it out. And you're just putting tons more leverage in the system. And it's all going to come crashing down. It's going to be your fault.
No. So I'll actually pile on from your side, okay, but then I'll answer. Right. So all those things probably are true, but what in the world are you doing letting kids play with money? And they, if they have no credit rating, they should slave away and get some credit cards first and really build up their credit score the traditional way by So I actually profoundly disagree with the notion of debt is bad. And you're a man of words, so you'll appreciate this perhaps. Credit is always a good thing. Debt's always a bad thing. They're the same actual thing. And this is a lyrical digression, but this is a fintech-related conference. I think people hopefully will appreciate this. The problem with credit cards and payday lending is actually the same problem. You're allowed to refinance your own debt more or less in perpetuity at a rate that's high enough where over time it starts really causing you to hemorrhage cash or worth. The way to solve this problem at both levels, the payday lending, which is a necessary evil, and at credit cards, which is a luxury for some and a way to survive for others, is to create what we've internally dubbed a non-judgmental yet highly prescriptive framework of underwriting. But by the way, one of the things that actually I forgot to pile onto myself a little bit more, the other thing is, so you don't charge any fees. So people who are just writing the system, paying late because they can, there's no penalty, maybe not paying at all, everybody else, that price must be spread across the rest. So why do you even do that? Let's charge people late fees, slap their wrists so they know. So I think all of that is the false road. The right road is to give people tools that allow them to say, here's how I deal with my financial problems, all the while not doing things like, oh gosh, well, yeah, you're probably a bad risk, but I'll give you credit anyway. We can't do that because we make no money on late fees, we make no money on excessive interest, we don't have deferred, we don't have any of the tricks that industry has figured out. The only way we get paid is if you pay us back on time. As a result, our incentives are profoundly aligned. If you can't afford to buy the fancy trip, we will have to tell you you cannot. We can't kind of go like, well, I'll squint and then there'll be some late fees in it for me. I just say no. And so as a result, we can't judge whether the trip is something you need, want, or are frivolously buying. And there's many, many, many stories where we look at all these transactions, anonymously, of course, but we have to look at them for fraud. And say, oh God, the person is buying a suit, and they really shouldn't. And then you contact them like, oh, it's for an interview, job interview. Okay, well, I feel like a jerk for questioning the validity of that purchase. So putting away the question of how do you judge someone's purchase, because you can't.
Right.
One of our guys in the office, well, one of the veterans of a firm, 6 years in, buys a lot of rope.
A lot of what?
Rope.
Rope.
Man's a climber. He loves climbing. That's his avocation. I cannot judge his rope love, just like he isn't allowed to judge my obsession with coffee equipment. So putting that aside, if he can't afford the rope or I can't afford the equipment, we cannot underwrite the transaction.
And you have the analytics, of course, that help you predict that.
20 years of fighting fraud and underwriting credits, at some point you learn a few tricks. So, but yes, that is the cornerstone of our company is we will do our best to offer you a financial advice that is truly sound based on analytics and our understanding of your personal cash flow, and we'll ask more questions if we can't get it right. But if the answer is you shouldn't borrow money, we will tell you we can't lend it to you. I think the more people see the world that way, at some point it'll have to tip, and you can frame it as a, well, who are you to tell me what to do? We do have a lot of data and a lot of analytics, and a lot of people just refuse to think about money. The best medicine is to say, here's what your money looks like. Don't buy this trip, get a cheaper one. Don't buy this nice bicycle, pay an installment, but for a heavier bicycle. Bicycles are sold by the weight in the opposite direction.
Right.
Anyway,
right.
That's a bit of a long story, but
No,
I suspect we're the only ones doing it right.
I was just going to ask essentially a follow-up to that last statement, which is what's the barrier to entry? What's to prevent even Wells Fargo from doing what you're doing, or
so
could they?
For Wells Fargo incidentally is not, from what I recall, in the point-of-sale credit card issuance business.
Okay.
But there are several banks whose names I will not utter because I think they're in, politely speaking, amoral business, and rationally speaking, immoral one, where they get people these free loans or free cards, 0%, and don't remind them, and when they miss a payment, the rate goes to 30% APR, and it compounds from the time of card issuance, not from the purchase time, or not from the moment right now. So it's a retroactive interest recapture, which is exactly what pushes people into permanent state of debt. Those guys cannot enter our business because they're addicted to fee income. If you make half your money on fees and the other half on these nasty deferred interest programs, if anything, their clock is ticking louder and louder. 20 years ago, you could do this because the consumer that said, oh man, I missed this payment and now I owe twice as much, I must be the only idiot. Welcome to the world of Twitter and Facebook. Anybody who complains, I must be the only idiot, here's a lot of people saying, wait, I got slammed with the same damn thing.
Right.
About 30% of the people they offer these cards get hit with this flip up, as they call it in the industry. That sucks, and people are getting very loud. The problem with that, for their partners that help distribute these cards, it's their brand on the front of the card. If your department store card screwed you on a 0% loan, but not really, it's the department store that's eating the brand damage. And so the 83 NPS, as sort of a glamour metric as it might sound, is actually very important. That's the brand that we are helping build for our merchant partners. So it's essential that that is the core metric for the business.
All right, let me ask you a question, Max. What's in your wallet? Do you have do you have any credit cards? Do you own credit cards?
I do, like most people on the East Coast. Incidentally, our customer base, imagine the map of the United States, the coastal lines, push that in about 50 miles, everyone else, that's our customer base. People on the coast, yeah, because if, I don't know anything about your financial reality, and you probably don't know anything about mine, but both of us, I suspect, live on coastal cities, and we use our credit cards as a way to tally up our buys and pay them off at the end of the month. That's what most people who live in extremely well-developed, highly economically lucrative economic environment or labor environments do. Silicon Valley, very few people revolve unless they're in the service industry, and those people are being pushed out by the income inequality by the minute. Once you have been pushed out in the East Bay or from East Bay on to the other side of the country, you revolve. And you revolve because it's the best choice. What you really want is to pay things over time. And so my wallet is actually fairly boring. I have a credit card that was issued to me by the great company of a firm for my corporate purchases and one for my personal ones, and the balance at the end of every month is zero. Kind of boring, yeah. But I think what's fascinating is the credit state of every one of our customers, and sort of examining that as an anthropological bonanza.
So most of your customers are in the middle of America, then you're saying?
Middle by way of not in New York, San Francisco, LA, Seattle, Boston.
And how does a firm relate to or pertain to, or not, say payments in China, the QR systems that WeChat have? I mean,
I think that's actually, so we do it in an interesting way. So if you look at WePay and Ant Financial and various other payment systems that are kind of springing up in Asia, they're leapfrogging this whole notion of four-party networks, bank consumer network system that DeHock invented for Bank Americard. They're kind of like, this whole thing makes no sense at all. What we need is one buyer, one seller, one connective tissue, and let's make that easy so you can scan QR codes. I can put QR codes on your phone. That's how it works in a lot of those parts. They never had the shackles of the traditional four-party system, so they're going very, very quickly in their markets. The question I would throw at everyone here, and myself included, what happens when they come here?
Yeah.
That's a very, very relevant question. And I think there's this sort of a jingoistic / nationalistic, maybe patriotic answer. Well, we won't like Chinese payment systems. Just wait until they say, hey, you know what? We'll make it 10% cheaper for everybody.
Right. And someone may, one of the incumbent players may start waving the national security flag.
That was my jingoistic
right, exactly.
Point.
Right. I think you've said recently, Max, that the first or a real fintech company is yet to actually come to the fore. It doesn't even exist yet. What do you mean by that?
I think you have to innovate at the level of the true financial infrastructure as opposed to the outer points of it. The credit card industry calls itself the rails for a reason. They're not the endpoints. They just get things from point A to point B. They're the light infrastructure. So if you ask things like, how does credit really change? Like really, really change? Like how do you include another 50 million people in this country that should have access to credit? How do you include another couple 100 million people worldwide? That's innovation that we're, in my humble opinion, that's what we're trying to do. There are questions, what does a bank account really look like? You spend any time with people that do depository banking, they'll tell you, it's impossible to run a bank account in less than $1 per month. That it's just, you can't. Really? And how does any one of the Chinese companies does it on a substantially smaller number? And so that's already happening, that's innovation. But in the US, I think the sort of things that have always been this way are still being this way. And I think that's what the opportunities really are.
What is your take at a firm in terms of protecting your customers' data and privacy and security? I mean, how do you have any new ways of thinking about that?
I would say, one, we take it extraordinarily seriously. It's one of these things where the downside cost is absolute, while the upside incremental spend is a round off, so long as you're willing to do it and continue investing. So we continue investing, we continue building out capabilities in the team and auditing and pen testing and all that stuff that you have to do. I think we like to believe that we're clever and we're doing a lot of the right things, maybe more the right things than other people in the market do. But I don't think you can ever do too much. I think the real rub in the customer security and privacy is more about, especially on a privacy of your data side of the conversation, it's all about how many hurdles can you put the consumer through before they say, this is too secure for me, I'm just trying to buy a bicycle. And so that's the real tension. And I think our innovation there has actually been pretty good. If you look at sort of how exactly our firm works, it's about as good as a two-factor authentication. Yet it feels very smooth. As a consumer, you would probably say, oh, it's a lot easier than shopping with a credit card, especially if you've ever done it before. And yet it is a two-factor auth.
Could I get rid of my credit cards and just live my life on Affirm?
Some of our customers have said that that's what they would like to do, or maybe already getting close to doing. We cover pretty much every spectrum of a purchase. There are many things that credit cards are incredibly useful for that we don't do today. There's no piece of plastic with Affirm on it, and as futuristic as it might sound, I actually think that that's not necessarily the right answer, because the plastic interface in this country especially is the lingua franca. When you walk up to, unless you're one of these places that happen to have adopted sort of a cool, let's be like the Chinese companies and flash me a QR code, and there's a little bit of a story there with things like Apple Pay and Google Pay, so the NFC, but it's still awkward. The real sort of interface that works is chip in or swipe and go, and networks are finally dropping signature requirements, which is, God bless them, 20 years too late, but you can finally just swipe and go, which is I think, the right interface. So you can't quite do everything yet, but I think the opportunity to do everything is there.
Will that day come?
One step at a time. I got a lot of features to launch in our current business.